So let's chant together the three refuges, and I'll paste it again into the chat in case any of you are unfamiliar. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. So take a moment, settle into a comfortable posture for the meditation time. Let's listen to the body. And tonight we'll be reflecting, contemplating equanimity. And it's important that we have some confidence that this heart knows, understands the experience of this radiant balance. And it's different than, each particular flavor of love has a slightly different quality to it. So equanimity has a cooler quality than metta, that love of friendliness or compassion, tenderness of the heart, or appreciative joy. And related to this cool, radiant balance is a wise, maybe we could even call it exhaustion, wise tiredness of having taken the bait to react in this way and react in that way so many times, that the heart realizes this possibility of remaining balanced, valuing not losing the balance. No matter the joys, no matter the sorrows, no matter what's coming and going, confusing times and clear times. And sometimes all our heart understands about equanimity, the only real confidence or clarity that we have is that reactivity is not the way. But that's a lot of wisdom right there. Mistrusting aversion, mistrusting closing down or numbing out, mistrusting the promise, if only I have this, got this, then things would be fine. And it's that wholesome mistrust of all those ways of reacting and struggling that quite naturally lead to this balance, this cool, clear, unshakable balance that can develop here, right in the middle, right in our heart. And in this way, equanimity is not indifferent and it's not distant in any way. It's actually a way to be intimate or close, precisely because we don't need things to be different than they are. Doesn't mean we've lost our preferences. It just means that in a wise way, I'm tired of constantly struggling with the conditions of the moment. So, and then in that way, when we arouse equanimity, the first step, and then allow it to develop into this welling up, this well-wishing stage of the divine abode practice, the wish of equanimity understands that things come and go due to so many causes and conditions, not so much my wishes. So whether we're bringing our own life to mind or bringing to mind a situation one of our friends is going through, or the situation of all of us together on the planet, the heart feels quite free to wish well. May I be at ease with these conditions. Or may you be peaceful and happy and at ease. At the same time, knowing that my own happiness, your happiness, the happiness of the world depends on our actions and so many causes and conditions, not so much my wishes for myself, for others, for the whole world. But still, the wish for people to be at ease, or the wish for ourselves to be at ease, is a beautiful wish. And so we're happy to let the heart expand. May this life be at ease. May this heart be happy and at ease, no matter the conditions of my life. And I also understand that my happiness and unhappiness depend on my actions, past and present. And I care about the well-being of others. all the dear ones in my life, my friends and family. May you be safe and protected in your lives. May you be happy and peaceful, at ease, no matter the conditions. And I understand that your happiness and unhappiness depends to a large degree on your actions. But still I care. Still I'm willing to wish well because I care. Because it's a beautiful thing to do. May your heart be at ease no matter the conditions. And even if difficulties come your way, may you find your way to be at ease. So we're finding a way to abide, to trust this beautiful, cool balance. It's really the coming together of wisdom and love. Wisdom understands, senses the enormity of causes and conditions that make things the way they are. But just because things are unfolding lawfully according to so many causes and conditions, there's still this beautiful opportunity to wish well, to let the heart open wide with this radiant, compassionate balance. The love that understands that things are the way that they are, that they're unfolding lawfully, and that the heart wishes well, wishes for everyone's safety and well-being, happiness. And when you're able to sense this equanimity, you might need a supporting phrase like ease with the conditions of life. And whether you're sensing this equanimity toward oneself or toward others, ease, the ease of well-being, no matter the conditions. This wisdom that helps us be balanced no matter the conditions of our lives. And just feel how boundless, how open the heart can be with equanimity, how all-inclusive. And then practice resting or abiding in that radiant balance. And whoever or whatever comes to mind, just repeating the wish with words or silently. May you be at ease no matter the conditions. May you keep finding your way toward peace, release, and ease, no matter what's coming and going in your life. Or even just the word ease. So we'll continue in silence. remember it's helpful to use a phrase or a mental image as long as that is supportive. Anything you can do to keep the actual experience, the capacity for equanimity in mind. But when it feels quite strong and radiant, then release any need for the word or mental image and practice resting back or abiding, becoming this vast, radiant, cool equanimity. It knows how to be close without feeling pushed around by what's coming and going. So we're making the skillful effort to keep equanimity in mind, to arouse it, to sense the well-wishing, the expansive quality of it, to sense the boundlessness, every aspect of the heart, body, mind touched by equanimity. And then the more profound abiding, not so much doing equanimity practice, but abiding or resting or trusting, being the equanimity. Ease with conditions. We're doing our best to sense this radiant ease with conditions, this radiant balance, as a kind of love, inclusive, intimate love that knows how to be close to this messy, uncertain world we live in. The kind of love that isn't idealistic, isn't dependent on things being any particular way. The kind of love that's not afraid. So for a few more minutes, practicing, deeply trusting this capacity in our own heart to be balanced in a radiant, open, inclusive way. May all beings be at ease in their lives, no matter the conditions. As the Buddha taught, I will abide, pervading all quarters, with this heart imbued with equanimity, above and below, all around, everywhere and every way. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, boundless, free from fear and ill will, free from hate. I will abide. The heart that knows no bounds, the heart that's not afraid of uncertainty, knows how to be close, knows how to be real no matter the conditions. And to really feel this as a kind of gift all around and also to ourselves. And take a little time, adjust the posture as you need. So we're getting close to the end of our winter course. We've been studying the 4 divine abodes, or the 4 Brahma Viharas, these beautiful attitudes of love that the Buddha taught about. Metta, or loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, appreciative joy or sympathetic joy, gladness, and then upekkha, equanimity. And equanimity is a really important teaching in the Dharma and the Buddhist teachings. And it's taught, it's described in different ways, including this way that we're looking at this winter as one of the 4 divine abodes, one of the 4 attitudes of love. But that it can arise in different ways. But maybe before I start, I'll just see if there are any questions about how we can meditate. And we've been using this sheet that I included the first few weeks with the 4 stages of metta practice, where we learn, and you can do this all day long, not just in your formal meditation practice, but how can I arouse that attitude, that emotion of equanimity? And remember, try. It's like experiment. There takes a little bit of willingness to just try to bring it to mind. And like what images, like the smile of the Buddha, if you've seen a statue of the Buddha, and that serene, balanced smile is just sort of supportive of remembering that possibility. But we have to experiment with arousing it. And then once it's arisen, once you've aroused it, then to notice the expansive nature of equanimity, the inclusive nature, the radiant nature. So that's actually the object that you're keeping in mind, like that it has this organic nature to include. So even though we maybe experienced equanimity when we were all comfortable on our couch and we had finished our busy day and we had a nice meal and we have some hours before us with no responsibilities and we feel some equanimity. But then if we notice that balance and that not needing things to be different, but then notice that it can spread, even though as I bring other things to mind, I imagine the bigger world that I'm part of. Clearly, not everybody is comfortable, but we can have that radiant balance like, oh, yes, sometimes it's like this. Conditions are unfolding due to so many causes and conditions. And there are people who are really suffering, and there are people who are really happy. And in this moment, is there a heart that can hold it all without having to be in denial? And it feels sometimes that I don't want to expand because I'm going to ruin my good feeling when I bring more and more of the world, more and more beings to mine. But that's how we develop the practice until it's boundless. That's the third quality we're developing. And then the fourth is dropping the doing, really discovering that equanimity, when it's developed, when it's seen clearly, it has its own feedback, its own way of self-generating itself. All these qualities of love do. And so we can abide, we can rest. Because all of these qualities of love that we've been studying this winter, it always sounds a little funny to say it this way, but it's more about what's not there than what is there. So it's more about in terms of equanimity, more about the absence of reactivity, the absence of expectations, the absence of trying to make something happen. In a way, the heart, the mind is aligning with nature. So we have a question here from Megan. On the dance of compassion and equanimity, when encountering a being that is suffering greatly. Yeah, in a way, this is the probably one of the reasons why equanimity is included in these 4 divine abodes. It's not just compassion, but mudita, appreciative joy, even the basic friendliness and goodness of metta. There's really none of this classical expressions of love without equanimity. I mean, imagine compassion without equanimity. Then, and we talked about this when we were looking at compassion, then there would be a real agenda like, I'm not okay with your suffering. And it's not so much, that's not the same as saying, I deeply desire to do whatever I can do to alleviate your suffering. But that I'm not okay with your suffering is sort of an affront. It comes from this idea that suffering doesn't belong. Pain doesn't belong. Terrible things don't belong. But see, that's what that does is it's just, I mean, just simply, it's a contraction in the moment. So I sometimes, when I'm counseling somebody who's in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and I need to, for my own health and well-being, and I think it seems to be able to be useful for the other person, I need to be grounded in equanimity, this radiant balance. And the thing is, the radiant balance feels really good and, in a funny way, solid, like grounded. And so when I'm in that place and interacting with the person in that place, I might at times seem like, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty balanced. How could I possibly be helpful? Or the person's going to feel like I'm not really showing up for them because I'm not in the same place they are. with their difficult situation. But what I find in those interactions is that my presence seems to have been helpful. And so I've learned, even though initially it didn't, I did have some doubt about whether that was a helpful way to show up when someone was really hurting. And I think it's for us to deeply reflect on and experiment with. But even intellectually, I think it makes sense. When I'm suffering because somebody else is suffering, I'm not really helping them. My suffering isn't contributing to their suffering going away. And if anything, it's just another burden for them to know that their suffering is causing me suffering or causing somebody else suffering. And on the other hand, when somebody is showing up with a lot of balance, so let's just think of the worst situation. Somebody is really hurting and really reacting to the suffering, right? So they're lamenting, they're beating their breasts, they're really struggling, maybe in unproductive ways with their own pain. And we show up and we're doing the best we can, and we're relying on our capacity, the heart's capacity, to be equanimous, to know that conditions are the way that they are, and this heart knows how to be at ease and to wish ease no matter the conditions, not knowing whether the conditions are going to get worse for that person or better, or the conditions for me being around that person are going to get worse or better. But this great confidence born of experience that this heart can be at ease, that there is this capacity to be at ease with conditions, no matter the conditions. And the thing about however well we're able to do that as we interact, show up for this person, if nothing else, in a little way, we're modeling being at ease in a difficult situation, not pushed around by the pleasantness or unpleasantness, the uncertainty or whatever that's moving here in this moment. And that's exactly what the other person has to, in their own life, they have to figure out this capacity to be at ease no matter the conditions. Yeah. And like I said, Megan just added a little bit more just to me in the chat. Very helpful, especially exploring the belief that suffering doesn't belong and compassion as equanimous presence. Yeah, and that last piece, compassion, like to really, especially in these more challenging moments, to really call on that ground of equanimity, that radiant balance, radiant in the sense of like really sensitive. So that's really the radiance. When we use that word radiance, it is the sensitivity. And the ground, the sort of vast ground of equanimity, the cool ground of equanimity really allows us to be fearlessly close and engaged and interacting. Yeah, thanks, Megan. Any other questions about, and specifically about the practice that when we're sitting or walking and we want to do a more formal contemplation with equanimity, any questions about that? Yeah, and Fred put a note in, you can see in the chat. Yeah, is it Ellie? I think it's Ellie. Maybe somebody will remember Ellie's last name. It begins with an H, I believe. She was in Amsterdam during the Nazi occupation and then eventually died in, yeah, there we go. Thanks, Farron. In one of the concentration camps, but wrote beautifully about holding the horror of what was going on. She was a pretty young woman, I believe. but found ways to be balanced and even quite alive, but not in denial about the horror that was happening around her and to her. Any other questions before I go on with the talk about doing equanimity practice, about the way we did it tonight? As you're, I hope, learning, it's really a creative endeavor. And for each of the four Brahma Viharas, we have this strong conviction that I'm going to figure out rather, how to uncover this capacity for metta, compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity, and then how to keep it in mind so it can grow in the heart. So something from Marianne. Someone who fights ease and closeness with me, how can I continue to be at ease and unafraid and keep being the way I want to be? Yeah, but with any condition we encounter in another person or in the wider world, it's a little bit what Megan was saying. It's like we need to make space for suffering. So can it be okay that that person is that way? Equanimity really relates to living without expectations. Part of the understanding of the lawfulness of the moment is this phrase from Sylvia Boorstein, that things can't be other than the way they are. Things are breathtakingly, this is in Sylvia's book on the Paramis, Sylvia Boorstein's book, things are breathtakingly the only way they can be. My heart opens with equanimity, or my heart opens with compassion and equanimity, or something like that. But just that, like, it's that wise seeing that things can't be other than they are. Why would my mind wrongly conclude it shouldn't be this way? It's okay for the mind to realize, I don't like what's going on. I don't want things to be this way. But our understanding should be, of course, things are this way. You know how I know? Because this is the experience right here and now, of course. And if it's showing up like this now, then it's lawful. It's the only way for things to show up, because there were supporting causes and conditions for the world to be this way. We might think, like with the possible war in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, we might think that it shouldn't be like this. I thought we grew out of that sort of stupidity of going to war. And but things are the way that they are, and there are lawful causes behind the way things are. So how am I going to live my life? Am I going to cultivate a heart that knows how to be real and knows how to be close and knows how to include the way it is? Or do I want to cultivate a heart that's in denial, that needs to be in denial because I somehow have a strong feeling that I don't want it to be this way, or I wish it weren't this way? And that's the thing about the Dharma, it's fundamentally realistic. It's not optimistic, it's not pessimistic, it's realistic. Good. I'll say a few more things then about equanimity, and I'll save some time at the end for comments and questions too. I can't often catch the comments when I'm giving a talk, so but feel free to put them in, but you might have to remind me at the end that they're there. I don't know if people have read Gil Fronsdal's book, The Buddha Before Buddhism. And Gil Fronsdal, a wonderful teacher from the West Coast. He's also a scholar besides being a Dharma teacher. And he translated some of the texts from the Buddha, some of the verses that are considered pretty much in the Buddha's voice, because even at the time of the Buddha, some of the discourses refer to this discourse. So that's it gives the Buddhist scholars some confidence that this wasn't a later rendition or interpretation of the Buddhist teachings. And at the beginning of the book, Gil distills some of the central teachings that scholars sense are really coming from this historic person. Not fixing on views, like this is what the Buddha is telling us, teaching us students of the Buddha. Don't get attached to views. That makes a lot of sense to me. Non-dependence on sense experience. Okay, so we need to live our life, which is a sensory life, right? We're living in sensuality, but we want to live with our food and our treats and the difficulties and the painful aging bodies without dependence on sense experience. So that's a bit of a setup, but interesting, like how to be a sensory being, a sensitive being without dependence on sensuality. That was a second point that he distilled from these early teachings. And then the last two, one of the things the Buddha talked about is that a sage or a wise person, someone who's developed some real wisdom, is somebody, like the basic definition the Buddha gave over and over again for a wise person, is somebody who's peaceful with conditions of their life, or peaceful with the conditions in the moment. And not surprisingly then, the fourth point, distillation from Gil, is that the path is the practice of being peaceful with conditions, or you could say being equanimous with conditions. So in this way, equanimity is both very much related to the practice, but it's also related to the fruit of practice. And I made a copy of a teaching from Sharon Salzberg's book. I think it's a wonderful book, by the way, A Heart as Wide as the World. It was one of Sharon's earlier books, so it's quite a while ago that they wrote it. And Sharon is just talking about her early years in India. And I don't know if people remember these stories about Sharon. They're great. But I think she was a freshman or a sophomore, and she started college pretty young, like as a 17-year-old. So I think Sharon might have been only 18, and it was the end of her first year, I believe, but it might have been sophomore year. And Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a very famous Tibetan teacher, Lama, happened to be touring around giving talks. This is probably at the very end of the 60s or maybe 1970. And happened to go, I think, State University of Buffalo, or one of the state universities in New York State, where Sharon was a freshman or sophomore. And he was just answering questions. And Sharon's question that she had written out, put in the bowl with everybody else, was the first one. And Sharon said, her question said something like, I'm going to leave school for a year and go to India and study meditation. Who should I study with? And he had this great response, something like, and this sort of thing, it's best to leave it to the pretense of chance, which I think is a little teaching on equanimity. So she went to India as a young woman who had a lot of difficulty and loss in her life. You can read her wonderful book called Faith if you want a little bit of Sharon's biography. And just the learning that came from that difficult life. But anyway, she noticed, like a lot of us noticed, that it wasn't easy to sit for hours and hours and hours, and her body really hurt and had a lot of bodily pain. And so this is what she wrote. And again, it's in her book, A Heart as Wide as the World. Meditation practice is a powerful tool for revealing our conditioned reactions to unpleasant experiences, allowing us to penetrate to their very depth. Opening to painful experiences does not mean a passive acceptance of pain. Rather, we learn to go to the heart of each moment's experience, even if it's painful, because there, unclouded by conditioning, we discover our lives. Now, in the wider picture of equanimity, right, going to the center of the pain means just showing up one moment at a time, not presuming we need some kind of defense, but really it's this radiant balance. And it, one way to verbalize that radiant balance is, now things are like this, the only way they can be. And my choice is to stressfully become numb or disconnected, or to simply remain open and be willing to feel what I feel. And that's really goes right to the heart of equanimity. It's realizing I don't have to be afraid of being touched by what's coming and going. That's the balance. And even when we lose our balance, Sharon has another image, not in this chapter, but somewhere else in a talk or in a book. She talks about, we're always on a tightrope, and experiences are coming at us, pleasant experiences, unpleasant, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, right? These are the so-called vicissitudes, or the 8 worldly winds in the Buddhist tradition. They're coming at us, and every once in a while, we don't have a lot of wisdom or equanimity, and we lose our balance. But we always land on another tightrope. There we are again, with stuff happening, coming and going, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame. And if we highlight this capacity for equanimity, we might actually get good at staying on the tightrope in this balance. So let me read a little bit more from this. She's talking about physical pain, right? She said, it doesn't mean a passive acceptance of pain. Rather, we learn to go to the heart of each moment's experience, even if it's painful, because there, unclouded by conditioning, we discover our lives. The effort to push away what is unpleasant, the tendency to project pain into the future, and then to feel overcome by it, the interpretations we add to it, all keep us from having a personal, direct, and intimate acquaintance with what we're actually experiencing. So when we observe something like pain directly, we come to see it as see its actual nature. Like everything else, pain is a changing phenomenon with no inherent substance. When we say it's no inherent substance, what we mean is pain, like everything else, is in motion. Like when we're feeling sensation, any sensation, you can touch the cushion or the chair or your leg now, and we think wrongly that touch is a thing, like a noun. But touch isn't a thing. It's a river. It's a flow. And things that are in motion aren't really much of anything. And this is true with even the most intense physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain. And this is what really allows for equanimity to deepen, is when what makes something unbearable, whatever the initial, experience of pain is, what makes pain unbearable is the wrong idea that it's a something, as opposed to what it actually is. It's an experience being known. And experience is always a river. It's always in motion. Nobody is saying that the pain might not be getting more intense. It might, or it might be diminishing, but it's not a static, fixed entity. But because the mind wrongly thinks that difficulty is that, then it makes sense to the mind to resist it, because we imagine pain is some solid edifice or difficulty. Now, I don't want, it isn't a matter of some philosophical, it's really a matter of philosophical discussion. It's really a matter of just experimenting. And remember, in this sort of thing, it's better to experiment initially with the pains that are relatively not overwhelming and really build our confidence. You're a little cold, right? And then oh yeah, I'm practicing equanimity. I'm practicing this superpower of radiant balance, no matter the conditions. So we remember that equanimity allows us to be close with everything, including being cold. And then there's not just the cold temperature, whatever that direct, immediate experience in the body is. There's also all of our ideas, like this is going to kill me, whatever we might think about being cold, or this is stupid. And like when we experiment, we're really learning how that wholesome and pleasant, inner pleasant quality of equanimity can hold that, can include everything. Doesn't need to be confused by any of that. So Sharon then writes, eventually I found that my legs relaxed, my knees reached the floor, I could sit for long periods of time with no pain, yet I was, in fact, released from my terrible fear of pain long before then, when I saw through the seeming solidity of the pain, rather than viewing it as a monolithic entity taking over my body. I saw the pain as a kaleidoscopic world of ever-shifting sensations, tingling, tightness, heat, throbbing, and 1,000 other qualities of sensation. These were what I had been lumping together and calling pain, she puts in quotes. By seeing these component parts, all in essence coreless and ephemeral, I finally learned to explore the texture of pain rather than feeling crushed by it. Now, let me give you another example, and it maybe relates a little bit to Megan, who I think it's okay to share, has been doing a lot of palliative care as an MD doctor. And so dealing with people, obviously, some of them at least in really difficult circumstances. So I can bring to mind being with people in really difficult circumstances. And when the heart has this capacity for equanimity, then the heart also has this capacity to be really intimate and close. And like Sharon is saying, the whole moment comes alive. Our bodily sensations, the sense of the other person there, the space of the room, the love in the room, the intimacy of the room. I'm guessing some of you know this experience where, and even though the context might be that somebody is really suffering, really doesn't like their experience, is really afraid, or whatever it might be, our subjective experience is that the moment is beautifully alive. And that the beauty and goodness or wholesomeness of that really provides that counterweight for the heart to be intimate with the suffering that this person is experiencing. We need that confidence in the beauty and wholeness of the moment to be able to have an honest and intimate sense. This person is really hurting. They don't want the conditions. I can't give away my well-being or my safety or my perspective, right? Because that would be somehow, just like wanting to be a god or something like that. We can snap our fingers and take away someone's pain, but we can show up, and that's what I was saying earlier. It's really something to be able to be in a difficult place, but to remain balanced. It's a gift all around to offer that, to be able to offer that to anybody. And what really allows us to do that is that in those moments, we're going to be having strong reactions, because they're conditioned into the mind, like, I'm really afraid of your pain, or something like that, or I really don't want this to be happening to you. But part of what equanimity knows is that liking and not liking, those different two sides of the same coin of reaction, not wanting the moment to be the way it is, that's just what that is. We don't have to be confused by the liking or disliking or by the strong reactions. We don't have to suppress reactivity. I notice in certain situations like that, I'll even get that reflex, like if I'm in a hospital setting and there's just, whatever, a lot of blood or a lot of just stuff that can evoke that sort of like almost wanting to vomit or throw up. And so it doesn't mean that the sort of bodily reactions that we're immune from them, but just that there's space for that too. Or whatever happens, the smell in the room is turning our stomach and we have to step out or something like that. So remember, this is really important about equanimity, maybe as much as any of these qualities and teachings that the Buddha offers. There can be a desire to imitate it. And some of you have heard me say this before, but one of my teachers in the 90s, Michelle McDonald, still one of the teachers at IMS, but toward the end of one of the longer retreats, 3-month retreats, she said to the whole group, one of the great things about a long retreat, you get rid of some of your false equanimity, right? Just the pretend equanimity. We become a little bit raw, in a longer retreat. But actually that's more in the direction of equanimity, like a willingness to be real and not afraid to be real with the conditions. And we're sort of giving ourselves permission to be real, and it doesn't stop there. We give everybody permission to be real, and that's such an important gift that we can offer. This is from Christina Feldman, one of the elders, one of the founders really of, not the initial founders, but one of the early teachers at IMS, and still teaches quite a bit at IMS. And I think Christina founded with others Gaia House, which is a big important retreat center in England. And she writes, equanimity does not leave kindness, joy, or compassion behind, but is imbued with these qualities which rescue it from indifference or coldness. Like kindness, joy, and compassion, equanimity is not a state, but describes a relational way of being with life that rests upon a profound understanding. And I like this relational way, meaning it's moment to moment to moment. That's why that image of being on a tightrope is really good. It's like, it can't be a fixed stance, equanimity. It's something we're rediscovering moment by moment. And that's true with all of these Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes. Kindness is not a fixed stance. Compassion can't be a fixed stance. It has to, in a sense, re-arise moment by moment by moment to be real, to be actual. As soon as it becomes a stance of some ego, right, then it's this fragile, brittle thing that has to defend itself, because it's really an idea that a mind is clinging to. But compassion, equanimity, these 4 divine abodes, they're not ideas. It's a way of relating that, like Christina says, it's really grounded in an understanding. And when we arouse metta or arouse equanimity. We notice its expansive well-wishing, how organic and natural it is to be more and more inclusive. We learn how that goes to the nth degree, and we really sense and feel that boundless quality. Everything is colored or affected by the kindness, by the love, by the equanimity. And then release the doing and abide in that state. Remember, it's a natural state. It's more about what isn't there. And so that way of relating is really having teased out fear and teased out the tendency to control, to want to dominate the moment, to want to fix the moment. I like to think about equanimity in particular as, having a friendly relationship with exposure, like really studying exposure. And I did that during the guided sit. I was practicing, of course, even as I was giving instructions. And there's a lot in my life. I mean, I have a pretty nice life, I have to say, but I feel burdened by my duties and responsibilities for sure at times, and I definitely feel burdened by the state of our world and the injustices and inequalities and suffering of not just humans, but so many creatures and beings on this planet. And seems like a tall order to say yes to the world as it is. But it's the only, I notice that if I don't do that regularly, then my mind starts getting more and more addicted to pleasant sense experiences. We wonder why we need things just the way we want them to be. We need nice entertainments, and we need nice food, and we get tighter and tighter about these things that we know on some level aren't ultimately that important. But all of a sudden we're noticing how tight and stingy and controlling and demanding we are about our conditions or circumstances. And it's because we haven't practiced relaxing and opening and including the world, our relationships, our body, the good and the bad, just as it is. And so we're keeping it, like, oh, no, I can't let you in. And so the way we distract ourselves is we seek pleasure. So the imbalance, whenever, this is that famous discourse on the second arrow. I don't know if people have read that, but it's a really powerful little teaching. We tend to think it's just that simple point that when difficult experience comes up, then my resisting the difficult experience is another cause for suffering. That is the point, one of the points the Buddha makes. But he makes this much more subtle and important point that we're out of balance with both neutral and pleasant experience, not just unpleasant experience. So because we don't know how to be with unpleasant experience, we start having a distorted relationship to pleasant experience, because the heart thinks it's more in need of pleasant experience to deal with not knowing what to do with the unpleasant experience in life. Remember, that can be just unpleasant experience, could be just as simple as knowing there are people out there who are suffering. So it isn't even our own direct personal suffering. But because we don't have equanimity with suffering, we start having a more and more distorted relationship with pleasure, all pleasures, fantasies, food, whatever it might be. And because we have this more obsessive relationship to pleasure, we start having a distorted relationship to neutral experience. Like, you're not pleasant, so I don't care about neutral experience. So this basic fear of unpleasant and this basic conclusion that unpleasant experience doesn't belong in my life, you know. I mean, how do we come up with that conclusion, like bad stuff shouldn't happen to me? Where in life have we learned that? But anyway, we do. And so we get tight, we want to turn away from what's unpleasant, we go to pleasant experience, become more obsessed and dependent on pleasant experience, and therefore ignore all the neutral, because neutral experience isn't helping us defend ourselves from unpleasant experience. And so our relationship with the entirety of the sense world gets out of balance. And equanimity is a way of restoring that balance, which is, sometimes it's like this. It's like that story I tell at the intro class about the farmer. I know a lot of you have heard it. I'll just say it briefly. It's just a made-up story. It's not based in history or anything, but it's just a teaching story about a farmer who's got a lot of problems in life, tracking down the Buddha to ask for some help. And he just takes some time to tell the Buddha basically to complain about all the things that are hard in his life. Can't count on the weather, all the pests, the farm animals not doing what they're supposed to do, his kids not helping out with the chores on the farm, and on and on and on. And the Buddha sort of listens compassionately and says, well, I think everyone just has 83 problems. Nothing really you can do about that. So he's basically saying, yeah, that's the way it is. When you have a body, when you have life, when you want to survive, there are problems. 83 of them, matter of fact. And even if you figured out one, how to solve one, you'd probably get another one anyway. And so, of course, the farmer marches off like, I thought you were going to be able to help me and you didn't have anything to say. Kind of storms off. And just before he's out of earshot, the Buddha says to him, even though I can't help you with your 83 problems, I can help you with your 84th problem, which is not liking having 83 problems. Thinking that the exposure to the 8 worldly winds of gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, or, the ups and downs, the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows in life, thinking that it shouldn't be this way. And remember, equanimity doesn't mean that we don't get involved and try to make things better. It just means we put balance first. We trust that balance, that evenness, because it allows us to be close. And then if there is something to do, we can do it because we're close. We're more intimate, we're more sensitive. We're not afraid of the exposure. That's kind of the definition of that balance, is the balance doesn't come, there is an initial equanimity we get when we can remove ourselves from what's threatening and what's provocative and what's stimulating. And then we get a kind of equanimity that's based on the experience or the conditions, circumstances, but that's not the deeper equanimity. The deeper equanimity really comes from this wisdom love that has learned not to be afraid of exposure. And that's what we like to see, when we think about someone who's saintly, and maybe some of you have examples of this in your life. We'll have small groups next week for our last week. And you might just share if maybe you were that person, or maybe you know somebody who just manifested this radiant balance, even in the middle of a real mess, a real difficult situation. But I want to save a little time. We have about 10 minutes left to see if there are any questions. And I'll start with Alyssa's question here, or comment. She writes in the chat, in practicing equanimity, especially in an area where I'm feeling suffering, I fear that my equanimity will veer into delusion. seems like a fine line between delusion and the expansive nature of equanimity. I have a deep fear of stumbling into delusion, attempting to practice equanimity. How do I decipher between the two? Well, it's, the whole way that we understand the development of our practice has to be grounded in these very pragmatic ways, like how am I living my life? How am I in my relationships? So when we practice abiding in that expansive quality of equanimity, we're not expecting to deal with a crying child or, a difficult relationship or, some of the ordinary difficult times in life in that refined, boundless expression of equanimity. But we are interested to see if we're handling those ordinary, challenging places with more resilience and more balance and more nimbleness and more lightness and more creativity and more tenderness. And that's how we see the value, is that I'm the sort of how I show up in the world is being transformed. In a way, the way to think about the deeper meditative states, like that, those states of emptiness and those profound states of peace and those profound states of balance, it's more like a powerful therapy session, but it changes us going forward. It's like the wiring is getting reworked. When we're in that place of boundless love, boundless equanimity, and we're really seeing how trustworthy, how it doesn't even take Mark to do it. It's just its own, like it's beautiful and it's impersonal. It's here and now, but it's not really me. It really changes how we see everything. Like that self-centered lens, it just doesn't dominate the mind as much as it did in the past. So in the moment, Alyssa, the question is, are your motivations in how you're practicing wholesome? Do you trust them? Do you trust the pleasantness? You can even ask yourself, is there any reason to mistrust what I'm experiencing here and now? And if your mind creates something that scares you, then you might need to really take a look at that. Like, is there actually anything here to be afraid of or to be concerned about? Do I have any evidence that I'm becoming a less kind, less effective, less skillful human being? And Alyssa, you can unmute yourself if you wanted to add some details to your question.
Sure, thank you. That's a helpful answer. And I think that when I'm in my day-to-day life in a challenging situation, I'm thinking of with my partner, wanting to practice equanimity, be kinder, be more sensitive in the conversation. I guess I'm calling it delusion, but it feels very sometimes fragile. It feels vulnerable. And these fears of, I don't know, being taken advantage of or stumbling into, just stumbling into, I guess, just like if we're in an argument and I feel like he did something that felt like a betrayal. And there is some evidence, like I'm afraid of kind of forgiving and that it could happen again. But I want, all the evidence is there that we're working on something. But at the same time, I feel like, oh, I just don't want to be betrayed. And so am I just being really naive to be like, to be attempting to be so kind? And so I find my wheels spinning. And I guess that's like a practical thing that I'm really dealing with right now, like in these 8 weeks,
Yeah. But this is the thing why it's so important to experiment, especially now that's, just sort of having these intense relationships with partners, that's sort of graduate level practice, but still practice there, but
Mhm.
gain more confidence in more ordinary,
Good.
intense experiences. Because what you'll find, like, your parent, right, Alyssa?
Mhm.
So with your children, just sort of the ordinary give and take of being a parent, and you might have more confidence of getting into this balanced place. And remember that balanced place is a really nimble place. So you're not coming at this relationship with your child with an idea of how you should be a good parent in this particular situation, because that would be a fixed view.
Mhm.
But you're having this radiant, sensitive, exposed, but balanced. And you're kind of like ready to be a sort of a loud, forceful parent, having a
Mhm.
loud, forceful parenting moment, or a quiet, receptive parenting moment. You don't know. It's
Mhm.
going to be birthed out of the exposure of the present moment.
Yeah.
So that the equanimity isn't, we have to, and this is partly just how we think of it in English, the term, we have a look of someone who's like, you know, Minnesota nice, like, well, whatever. But
Yeah.
that's not equanimity. That's just like a personality habit, it's like a fixed way of dealing with life. But equanimity is this very vibrant, very alive balance. And anything can be born out of that balance. So if in that moment of talking with your partner and you're really hurt and you're feeling like they're not really listening or they're not really getting the point, well, quite naturally, something fierce would be born out of that radiant balance.
Mhm.
And you might even be, in a sense, you as the ego might be, whoa, I said that, I did that, I spoke that way. But the other thing would be that would be recognized as, whoa, that was good. The aftertaste would feel really good, precisely because you didn't do that from a fixed place. It arose because of the intimacy.
Mhm.
And that's the thing. That's what helps these intimate relationships, is that we can actually be real with each other. And we can't be real when we have a lot of this expectations about like how I'm supposed to be in a relationship, or what happens if they don't like me anymore, or whatever might
Yeah.
kind of be clogging it up. Equanimity is quite fearless, right? Because we're putting our confidence in that radiant balance, not in any stance of how I should be, what I should say, what I shouldn't say.
Right. I see that.
But it's scary at first. That's why we want to practice where it's relatively simple,
Mhm.
and then just see like what comes out of it. Parenting is actually a great, I mean, it's easy for me to say not having raised kids, but I was a school teacher, so I've got a
Yeah.
little experience, but I know it's not really the same. But it seems like it would be a really good, when things are going relatively well as a parent, place to practice equanimity, because not being equanimous just is going to be such a setup for judgment, judging the kids and judging yourself as a parent.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa.
Thank you.
I think we need to wrap it up here. But like I said, next week we'll have small groups. I did put some articles, including one by Sharon and one by Gil Fronsdal and one by another friend and teacher of mine, Shala Catherine, on equanimity. Two of them are quite short, so you might want to take a look at those. And if you come across your own resources that you think would be really good, send them to me and I'll include them in next week's email for everyone to take a look at. But the last thing I want to say is really put some time every day, either while walking or sitting or lying down, so in some meditative posture, and just see if you can arouse equanimity and keep it in mind and really develop that muscle. And that would be a nice thing then to share in the small groups next Monday. Is like, what happens when I can keep equanimity in mind? And related to that is just calling upon it at different times, like you're about to go into a meeting or whatever, a difficult situation, then just remembering that the heart is capable of this nimble, radiant balance that allows the heart to be close and exposed and balanced. Call on it and see how it might show up in those more tricky, difficult situations in your life. Look forward to connecting next week. And the next Buddhist studies class will be a shorter one, 4 weeks. We'll be studying sensuality, craving, contentedness, and dispassion. So basically, the relationship with sensuality, whether it's craving or contentment and dispassion. And so I hope some of you will be interested in that. We'll take 1 week off. So we'll meet next week. We'll have a week off. And then the 4-week spring course will begin that following week in March. It must be like the second Monday in March. Have a good week of practice, everyone.